Hello everyone, and welcome to this HEC Pairs virtual conference room for our HEC Insights webinar series. When joining the conference, you will notice that microphones have been switched off. You will, however, be able to ask questions and make comments using the Q&A menu that you will find at the bottom of your window in the Zoom toolbar. The professor will only answer questions and read comments sent through the Q&A menu, and will not be taking any questions coming from the chat. Please be aware that questions in the Q&A can be upvoted by clicking on the thumbs up icon and thus prioritized on the professor's dashboard. Make sure that you keep the chat for technical questions to our team only. We would also like to remind you that the webinar is broadcasted live on YouTube. I'll leave the floor now to Anne Michaud, who is Associate Dean for Pedagogy at HEC. Anne?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Adrien. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome and thank you very much for being with us today. I'm Anne Michaud, Associate Dean for Pedagogy at HEC Paris, and I'm very happy to introduce this webinar today. It is my greatest pleasure to welcome my colleague and friend Jérémy Ghez, Associate Professor at HEC Paris, to talk about the US elections and what they mean for the rest of the world. Dual citizen policy analyst at Front Corporation, Jérémy certainly is an expert on this topic. Jérémy, a warm welcome as well, and thank you very much for accepting the invitation to speak in this webinar. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anne. I appreciate you being here and all of you coming. It's an important day today, on Election Day. I'd like to start out by saying that, I hope all of you are well, that you're all in good health, and so are your loved ones. I am acutely aware of the context in which we're doing this. This is not common. It's not something that I want to overlook. So I really hope all of you are well, especially those of you phoning from the United States, perhaps. It's worth reminding ourselves that, every generation seems to think that every single event that happens in their lives is historical. Well, this one is no exception, but on the other hand, it's hard to overstate the importance of what we're going through and this relationship between us, the rest of the world, and America that we're discussing today. I'd like to make this as interactive as possible. Some of you might know the tool menti.com. You have a flash code here. You'll be able to connect afterwards too if you'd like, but please consider joining us on menti.com right now using the flash code or the passcode 9400736, and you'll be able to tell us what is on your mind when on this election day, this very historical election day. First and foremost, I'd like to start with the electoral basics. My apologies to those of you who know this by heart, but I think it's important we talk about the basics because many of these basics are going to influence the way we think about what happens tonight and tomorrow. Remember, this is the US electoral map, 538 electoral votes in total. Over 50 states and the District of Columbia, where I vote, so I never forget about the District of Columbia. And as a result, you need half of those votes plus one, namely 270 to win. With two exceptions, in Nebraska and Maine, it's winner takes all. So the candidate that gets most votes in each of those states gets all of the electoral votes, so 29 in Florida or 55 in California. And the first one who reaches 270 votes is the one declared the winner of the elections tomorrow, of the election either tonight or tomorrow. This means that you can actually get a lot of votes in California and in New York, as Senator and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton got more than 2 million votes than Donald Trump in 2016, but still lose the Electoral College, mean not win the key states and not win enough electoral votes to actually win the election. This has happened quite a few times. Last time around was the last election in 2016 with Hillary Clinton. You all remember, I'm sure, for those of you who are old enough, the 2000 election where Al Gore and George W. Bush were neck and neck, and George W. Bush ultimately won that contest. 1976 was another illustration of this, where he both won the election, but it was to a very, very closely fought race. So what do we know about tomorrow? We know that Joe Biden is most likely going to win the electoral vote, probably because of significant votes coming from those significantly historically Democrat states, but we still have no real indication of who will win enough electoral votes to become president, and this is going to be the topic of the next conversation. But before I get into campaign dynamics in greater details, I'd love to know, how did you experience this vote? How did you experience this whole campaign? And again, let's go back to Mentimeter. And again, menti.com right here, and use the passcode 9400736. And you tell me, so between Trump and Biden, who did you find the most convincing? Don't be shy. This is a race. Quite a few of you connected. I'll let you guys decide. There is a trend. There is a trend. Still let some of you connect and maybe do the votes. I see it. Well, it seems as if we have a significant majority of people in this room who were more convinced by Joe Biden than Donald Trump. I probably can't say this is what's exactly going to happen tomorrow with the exact same proportion. It would be interesting to check, by the way. But this reflects, I think, a lot of the feelings that, had the rest of the world been voting in this election. Maybe the trend would have been far less undecisive than what we're seeing right now. But see, a clear preference, it seems, for the candidate, Joe Biden, at least in this room. All right, let me ask you a second question, guys. Now you can use words. How would you describe this campaign? How did you experience it? What was your feelings about it in terms of, was it constructive, not so constructive, policy-oriented, not so policy-oriented? How did you guys experience all of this? It was invisible. Wow, that's a word. Yeah. Chaotic, chaos, not constructive. Yeah, disappointing, some say. Joke, I'm seeing. Exhausting. I share that point of exhausting. Yeah. It feels as if aggressive, certainly. It feels as if, like many other Americans and many in the rest of the world, we might actually feel very satisfied once this whole campaign is done. The confusion, the chaos, the aggressiveness, I tend to agree. The fact that it wasn't so constructive, I tend to agree too. Divisive, most certainly. Frightening, I guess, to some extent, given the ocean existing between these two candidates and the significant divide between these two candidates. I think that's right. That's absolutely right. To summarize, what do we know about this campaign, or where do things stand? Well, number one, Biden is on top. This is what the polls are telling us in the whole country, but also in key popular states. I'll say a few more words about this. At this point, Biden's lead is greater than Clinton's lead in 2016. That's the second point. The third point, which is a corollary, is that Biden's lead is sufficiently significant that he could basically withstand and survive a 2016 type error in the polls. So even if the errors are as significant as they were in 2016, Biden would still survive that. But here's the little issue that we might actually need to be thinking about, is that, as I just told you, the US election isn't one election, it's actually 50 different elections 51 if you count the District of Columbia. And it means that basically the polls that really matter are the state polls. And we're still not entirely sure that we have corrected all of the flaws that we saw in 2016. And this is what basically leads me to say today that this race is pretty much deadlocked at this point. There are 9 fundamental states, 9 states that you should be watching. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa, Nevada over here, Arizona, Texas, Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. These are the states that are still widely open, that are still in reach for President Trump, meaning that in spite of this lead of President Biden, he might still be able to win again. There are two key states here. Considering that Texas has always been Republican, that it might stay Republican. If Biden wins Texas, I think that's the end of it. But it is probably very unlikely at this point, even if they're neck and neck. But there are 2 other key states that you should pay attention to. It's Pennsylvania and Florida, 2 states that President Trump won both of them in 2016, but that are crucial, that are extremely fought right now. And if he's able to pull off Pennsylvania and Florida, then he actually has a fighting chance of still winning tomorrow or tonight, and tomorrow we might have those results. If instead he loses one of those 2 states, either Pennsylvania or Florida, then his chances become significantly smaller. By the way, if he does lose, and considering this map is more or less correct, actually, no, if he wins Pennsylvania, that would be 273 for Biden, still not enough. But Florida certainly would be able to put him on top. So that's basically the races that we should be watching. Pennsylvania, Biden's lead, this is fresh numbers from this morning, plus 2.6, still in the margin of error. Florida, even smaller, plus 1.8 for Biden. So in other words, what we're really looking at is that, you know, even though the national numbers are much worse than what they were in 2016 and against Hillary Clinton, the battleground numbers are neck and neck. It is a narrow path of victory for Donald Trump, but it is still very much possible. And I think that in the spirit of 2016, to avoid the surprises that we've seen, it's important we keep that in mind. Another thing that we must keep in mind is that polls measure intentions, they don't measure outcomes. And this dates back to October 30th. So this is 3 days ago, where many people on the Democrat side were saying the mobilization we're seeing among minorities and other groups that traditionally vote for Democrats is actually far more modest than what we have been seeing so far. So this too might be another component of a potential surprise tomorrow. More beyond that, beyond the pure campaign dynamics, I think it's important to remember that this is a president that is fundamentally able to talk to large parts of the population. He may not be able to talk to you, and given the results of the little poll we did in the beginning, he might not be able to get to you, but he certainly gets to a significant part of America. Remember, you always have to remember 3 things about Donald Trump. Before doing politics, he was this self-made man who basically was, or at least this is the picture he wanted to give of himself, and maybe people might disagree, but this image of a person who could make it. And this is an image that I think many of us Americans relate to usually more often than not. Number 2, he was, as you guys know, not only the presenter of reality TV show, The Apprentice, but he was also a producer for that show. And what is interesting is that he spoke through that show to big parts of the population that were not able to talk to politicians usually. So he had that contact with a part of the population who wasn't voting anymore, who wasn't talking anymore. Number 3, the former owner of the beauty pageant, Miss America. So when it came to basically beauty pageants and when it came to basically trying to sell yourself, he was an expert at that. This captures quite well the connection he has with part of America that I think outside of America, we don't necessarily understand going down the line. Then comes the heavy arguments. Number 1, the economy. The economy, before the virus hit, the economy was actually going very strong. It was it experienced its longest economic expansion in history, 128 months from 2009 to February 2020. In the Q2 of 2020, the net worth of Americans was nearly increased by 7%. Same for the median household income, meaning this is something that basically wages were rising for everyone, even the most modest Americans in 2019 before the virus hit. So for Donald Trump's responsibility in all of this, Trump supporters will tell you he reformed the tax system in 2017, and he did a lot of deregulation. You might actually debate on the reality of the deregulation part, but this is the major selling point. And the threat is basically saying, look, if you vote for Joe Biden, say the Trump supporters, that Trump presidency, the Joe Biden presidency would put an end to all of this. This is why, strikingly, and this might seem anecdotal, but a little paper like the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, you guys know that in the United States, some papers, editorial teams take position. They endorse a candidate. They haven't endorsed a Republican since 1972. Pittsburgh is one of the major cities of Pennsylvania. Remember the role Pennsylvania is going to play today and tomorrow in the election outcome. Haven't endorsed a Republican president in 1972. They endorsed Barack Obama enthusiastically, they say in 2008 and 2012. They recognize that we're not talking, when we talk about Donald Trump, neither about Winston Churchill, no Franklin Roosevelt, no Ronald Reagan, but they say this is basically the economic outcome. They argue in that paper just last Sunday, Trump gets things done, and this is another part of America trying to push forward Donald Trump today. I know this might be extremely surprising to hear, but ultimately this is American pragmatism saying, you know, there's leadership, there's character, and then there are the results. And this is the push that we're seeing in some parts of America, not only rural America, but some parts of America that we really need to understand and really need to grasp in order to better understand basically why we might actually not call this race a done deal, and why there might actually be a war of narratives. Depending on who you ask, people might actually be on one side or the other. And this is brand new from yesterday or the day before, right out of the oven. The newest poll, do Americans feel better off since Trump took office? And this is just mind-boggling. But there you go. There's a third of the population, roughly a third of the population, who says, yes, we're better off, and roughly a third of the population who says, no, we're not. And this ignores the no change part, which is probably somewhere in the middle, and obviously probably a third. So you really have a divided country, not only in terms of ideology, not only in terms of politics, but even in terms of narrative of the past 4 years. Are the past 4 years about economic success? And if you think the answer is yes, then you are likely to vote for Donald Trump if you're an American. If you think the past 4 years have been about the state of US democracy, about the state of the US political system, about US standing in the world, then and you're basically saying, no, we're not better off, you're likely to vote for Joe Biden. And this is why this is such a hardly fought race right here, because it's really, really a divided America. Those 32% saying, you know, we're either much or somewhat worse off, are probably going to point to the crisis management and the pandemic. I think it's important to put the numbers of casualties, the number of deaths from COVID in perspective. What is interesting is you compare the pandemic, this has nothing to do in terms of numbers with the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, and the 9/11 attacks. And think about those two wars and the attacks, how traumatizing they were for the United States. I don't think we're paying too much attention to this number, which might feel extremely, extremely big at some point in time for the Americans. This is getting awfully, awfully close to casualties in World War II. Hopefully and thankfully, we won't reach the Civil War record, but this is to put the pandemic in perspectives. For a state that has often, or a country that has often felt it was isolated from the rest of the world, it was isolated from world affairs, this is basically a symbol of how it is not, and this is likely to shake American psyche and American psychology in terms of the relationship to the rest of the world. those 32% who feel we're either somewhat or much worse off will basically say, look at this Trump economy. Yes, it was able to beat expectations. So in light blue and the first and the second columns here are expectations from the Fed and from the congressional budget offices. And the dark blue is from the actual jobless rate. In 2017, 2018, and 2019, this Trump economy was able to beat expectations. In 2020, it was not able to. The real question tomorrow is whose fault it is. This is the key question, because depending again on how you answer this question, saying it was strong before the pandemic, it's not Trump's fault, you will likely vote for Trump, or the pandemic was so badly managed that it has economic consequences, in which case you're probably likely to be more skeptical of Donald Trump. This is the balance that we're basically facing, and why it is so hard to basically call the race at this point right now, even with the numbers and even with the lead that the challenger, Vice President Joe Biden, is showing. Then the ultimate question as well, which is kind of moot now when you think about it, but at least for the legacy of President Trump, you know, there's a running joke, which is we economists learn the alphabet again with every crisis. Will this be a V-shaped recovery, a U-shaped recovery, a Z-shaped recovery, or a W or an L-shaped? Many people now are fearing the swoosh-shaped recovery, namely, you know, we go down, but the rate at which we're able to find normalcy again, economic normalcy, is going to be very slow. There is a view that this swoosh is still the risk right here, because you see with GDP projections that are just new from last week, we're still maybe potentially very, very low and under the pre-COVID path. So that swoosh might actually be the weakness, the economic weakness that has undermined Donald Trump in key areas, especially of people who voted for him in the past. And then comes this idea of saying, it's not going to be a V, it's not going to be a swoosh, it's going to be a K recovery. The K recovery means part of the population, part of the economic sectors are going to bounce back very quickly and experience that V. And some of them are going to go deeper, deeper, deeper down. This is from the US Chamber of Commerce. They point to technology, some parts of retail, I guess, and software services doing extremely well. Others, such as travel, some parts of entertainment, obviously hospitality and restaurants doing extremely poorly. So you have a real duality between those two sorts of economic sectors, some doing extremely well and others quite poorly. You see these phenomena still at the population level as well, where, you know, women are doing worse in the recovery than men are. African Americans are doing worse than white Americans, and poor people are doing worse than rich Americans too. You see that K recovery, and you see basically this challenging the ability of Donald Trump to convince that this was a good and a powerful recovery. Even more broadly, beyond that, still another source that you should be paying attention to, 538, a poll of polls, still an approval that is extremely small with regards to historical standards, but extremely stable. When you look at George H.W. Bush between 1988 and 1992, or Bill Clinton, or even George W. Bush, or even Barack Obama for that matter, you see a lot more variability. Here it was low, but incredibly stable, meaning that Trump base has basically been solidified, but it hasn't expanded in a way that might have made his election easier to handle. So this is kind of the campaign dynamics, kind of the overview of why I am calling this race deadlock and why I am not ready to make any predictions. But I want to ask you one last question, which is this really what is at stake? By that, I mean, I wonder if Trump has not already won, and in the sense that for a lot of conservatives who voted for him, he has not already basically secured his own legacy, especially when you see what happens at the Supreme Court. He has nominated 3 justices For those of you who are not familiar with the US political system, bear in mind that the Supreme Court plays a key role in basically defining what is constitutional and not constitutional. Up until very recently, there was a real stability in a real balance between conservatives and progressive judges. By nominating 3 key judges that are more conservative than their predecessors, what is interesting is that he's long run speaking basically modified this balance on the Supreme Court. And let it be said, among conservatives who voted for him in 2016, clearly this was one of the missions he had. So for Donald Trump, you'd have to wonder, is this not basically mission accomplished? And even if he loses, I think many conservatives will basically tell you, not only did he bring the economic results, but he also brought that new balance to the Supreme Court. And this is basically what many of them were actually expecting going down the line. This was the setup. This was to try to give you an overall view of basically what is happening in this campaign dynamic and trying to understand basically what you can expect going down the line in terms of today, tomorrow, and maybe later days. I forgot to point out, there's also a possibility, because Pennsylvania and Florida are so intertwined, that and so fought, that basically we might not have results and we might have contested results. Let's talk about, what do we expect now from the United States going down the line, and what can we expect from a Biden presidency and from a Trump presidency going back to down the line. So let's go to Menti. And I'd like to ask you guys, how significant do you think Donald Trump has been for the United States? Do you think he's just an accident of history and we're going to go back to normality if he loses tomorrow? Or do you think that this is basically something that is revealing about the state of US politics today? So 1 basically says it's the new normal. 5 says it's an accident of history. And obviously anything in the middle. Which is interesting, because 2.6 to me means half and half. Interesting. Yeah, we're stuck at 2.6. Interesting. Yeah, which says a lot, because when you think about this from an accident of history standpoint, you do expect a little bit more of the same going down the line. You just say, he might lose tomorrow, and Joe Biden is going to bring back some normalcy to all of this. When you say he's the new normal, then even a Joe Biden presidency might actually profoundly change the relationship of the United States and the rest of the world for quite some time. And it might mean that we need to change our expectations of the United States. Let me say this. If Biden gets elected, and you guys will have understood that at this point, I feel that this is a really, really big if, right? If Biden is elected, well, the bar is going to be extremely high, because he's going to be at the head of a deeply, deeply divided country. You guys saw my numbers on the war of narratives, really a third and a third on both sides. And he said repeatedly, I want to become the president of all of the United States, of all of these states of the United States. And this is going to be something quite challenging for him. Trumpism is likely to be a lasting force. The discontent that brought in the anger that brought Donald Trump to the White House in 2016 is not going to disappear overnight, especially not with the election of Donald Trump. And remember as well that Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, potentially would face a Congress, we don't exactly know where it's going to fall, and would face a Supreme Court that has profoundly changed. So the lasting legacy of Donald Trump is going to be important, even if Donald Trump loses tomorrow. In addition, Biden is facing a lot of skepticism. What you have to remember is that Biden won a referendum during the Democratic primaries where basically during that fateful weekend of February, everybody went for him and supported Joe Biden because they needed basically a candidate early on in the system. So he won basically because his name wasn't Elizabeth Warren or wasn't Bernie Sanders. And if he wins tonight or tomorrow, we're likely to say he won because his name wasn't Donald Trump. And that's not a very comfortable situation to be in the sense that in terms of mobilizing, in terms of understanding what he stands for, this is going to be quite hard to basically pull off. Let's listen to the Wall Street Journal, what they said over the weekend. You know, they said, look, they may elect a man who thinks he's better and the opposite of Donald Trump because they want to restore more decorum and more calm to American politics. But for all we know, we're basically electing the exact opposite. So we're going to get a different kind of disruption. Joe Biden still is facing that form of skepticism that you're going to have to think about going down the line. So again, that bar is going to be very high. And when we formulate expectations from the rest of the world about a Joe Biden presidency, what we have to remember is that more likely than not, this presidency is first going to be about healing the US as a country, trying to bring people back together. And this is going to be something that is going to take a lot of efforts, a lot of bipartisanship, and this is not necessarily something that you see usually. What would it change for business? This is what UBS wrote. You can expect economic recovery, or at least the Biden administration to emphasize on economic recovery with special investments in infrastructure, green initiatives, healthcare coverage expansion. So yes, there might actually be tighter regulation and higher taxes, what many people opposing Biden fear, but what they're betting on is basically an additional boost coming from all of those investments. What is interesting is that, well, JP Morgan, the chief economist, actually agrees. He says, yeah, fiscal stimulus that you guys might know is actually not dead on arrival right now, and nothing is going to happen in the short run, so long as we don't have the results of the election. But $2 trillion is likely going to come shortly after presidential inauguration. So yes, you might fear longer term tax increases and maybe regulations, but they're still betting on more stability, more predictability, probably same policy approaches to key issues, but fundamentally different tactics. This is what actually the world of business is expecting from a Biden presidency. On the question of trade in China, it would be a mistake to think that Biden and Trump actually disagree. To some degree, Biden is actually even more attentive to the threat coming from China to the United States, that is, because he basically says this is not just about trade, it's also about technology, it's also about military, it's also obviously economic and ideological and diplomatic. So I don't think that there will be eased up tensions on the front of the Chinese-US relations. If anything, I think Joe Biden might actually take a different road, a different approach, not less hardline, but maybe a different approach, trying to unite more countries around the world. So I don't expect and wouldn't expect ease of tensions right there, but maybe a different method. On the question of NATO and global affairs, I chose this picture voluntarily to say, Joe Biden might actually look like his former boss, President Barack Obama. When President Barack Obama came to the EU and EU summits on NATO, at the European Union summit and so on, Barack Obama was often irritated by the fact that there were at least 28 other people sitting around the table, and thought to himself, this is never how we're going to get this transatlantic relationship to work. Remember, Barack Obama was the one who started thinking about the Pacific shift, the pivot to the Pacific, because he thought this is where the future of the United States lie. I think many of Europeans might think to themselves, Joe Biden will be good news for transatlantic relations. We should be very careful about that. First and foremost, because Joe Biden is going to have a lot to do at home. And in addition, well, because this isn't the recent tradition of the Democratic Party, it is basically one that is looking to achieve many objectives, especially in the Pacific region. And maybe the Europeans are going to need to get their act together. And I'll say a few words about that later on. And what strikes me is that among many people who support Biden, and rightfully so, but they basically go back and use very similar terms to save the transatlantic relationship and to save America's standing in the world. William McRaven, a military hero in the United States, basically saying, you know, we can't remain indifferent to our role in the world. Romano Prodi, former Prime Minister of Italy, basically saying, you know, if we really want to think about this, yes, fine, we won't go back to the initial strong cooperation, but, you know, the DNA might actually be the same. This is going to be something fundamentally interesting because we need a new piece of software to think about that transatlantic relation. More of the same isn't going to work out. And these are the type of things that we will need to worry about going down the line. On the climate issue, strikingly, Joe Biden goes far, far more and far beyond what Barack Obama had planned. $2 trillion of spending over 4 years related to green initiatives, trying to make the electricity grid carbon-free in the next 15 years. This is extremely ambitious. I think many of us are going to welcome this, but bear in mind that Joe Biden can't do this alone. He's going to have to legislate a whole lot. And if he faces a Congress that might not share his point of view, even among Democrats from swing states who might not share the will to regulate on these types of climate change related issues, this is going to be very hard for him to achieve. So you might expect welcome changes on there, but we have to be careful. Obviously, we need to talk about the possibility of a second Trump presidency. As I told you, it is not unlikely, and it is not something we can discount at this very moment with the information we have. I tried to look for the right numbers and tried to think about this, but Walter Russell Mead, a famous US historian, put this best, saying, look, second term presidents have another important trait. They tend to trust their instincts more. First, they look for a mark in foreign policy, and then they trust their instincts more. Let me put it lightly. President Trump is not a president who has never trusted his instincts. Quite to the contrary, he usually does trust his instincts. So if you think he has trusted his instincts a little bit too much during the first mandate, he's likely to do this even more going down the line. A presidency of doubling down, a presidency with an empowered president, an emboldened president. This is what we might expect from a second Trump presidency. Likely to go look for low-hanging fruits. We saw the very welcomed treaties between the Israelis and the Emirates and Bahrain. What is interesting is that those were not so hard to get. Would he be able to get more on this? Would he be able to get more in Latin America and so on? Those are really open questions at this point. All right, I got one final question for you before we conclude. And I'd love to know, how do you guys see America's priorities going down the line? You guys can rank these, you know, what would be first, second, third, fourth, and fifth priorities of the United States? What would be most important for you? Where do you think that the US has the most to achieve? Again, menti.com, 94000736. There's a struggle between China and climate change. This is interesting. The climate change seems to get the upper edge. Yeah, as I think we all do, because it's hard to imagine how we are, as humanity as a whole, able to tackle climate change going down the line without any real effort from the United States going down the line. Yeah, well, climate change in China, interestingly enough, I think the democracy part would have been something that people would have put forward going down the line. And apparently legislation for internet giants, that is not something you would expect from the United States. Thank you for your input. This is very, very interesting. Well, let's start with the new age of business, what's I find striking going down the line is, a lot of the Silicon Valley, a lot of tech companies, a lot of big companies from the past used to think, politics is just the occasional distraction. Well, now it's really an all-consuming force. TikTok was just one example for one of them. This interference from politics. This to me is the new normal, and you can expect this, and even on the Google front, and tomorrow Facebook and Amazon, maybe Apple, certainly Facebook and Amazon, the whole antitrust issue happening right now around this is probably the new normal. This is the oil of the 21st century. It's this notion of saying we need to rein in on those companies because their power has become too great. And this is where what is interesting to me, you're basically facing a setting in which people are agreeing on this. Democrats and Republicans, this is a consensus. So expect going down the line far, far more interference from business. And even if on the business side, you believe that, this is irrelevant, politics don't understand business, well, be careful going down the line because this is going to become the new normal. It's one of the rare consensus of US politics. I've talked about decoupling in other places and in other avenues, but this is another push that we're seeing in some parts of the United States where we're basically thinking about how dependent Americans are on China. And though this might not make sense, though diversification has always been the real meaningful approach to globalization, it might not be the case anymore that we're seeing this going down the line. Intel brought back part of its production in Texas in the midst of the coronavirus with the blessing of the US government. We're seeing supply chains that are getting increasingly changed because of what we're going through. And this might mean that globalization going down the line might be less interdependence and more independence between the two. Are we talking about a divided America forever? There's part of the population who is convinced that Donald Trump is the only solution. There's part of the population that is convinced of the exact opposite. This is not something that we should take lightly, especially in a country with a short history, a young history, but one of political violence. What we have to bear in mind here is that political partisanship and polarization has existed for quite some time in the United States, but it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The ability of the next president to solve this is going to be something that we need to think about. Last but not least, I wonder if we're not going to wake up, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow morning, for those of us living in Europe and Asia, with this new piece of news, namely that the United States has officially resigned from its leadership position, in the sense that it has trouble at home that it needs to take care of, and that basically, ultimately, we need to be in a standpoint and thinking to ourselves that the United States doesn't want to play this role. So I ask this to China. Does China want to play this role? Is the rest of the world comfortable with China playing that role? And asking that question might already be answering it. Maybe this is a question we must ask to Europeans. Europeans have been used to being the junior partner in this transatlantic relationship for far too long. Europeans have shown, well, their ability to regulate tech giants, their ability to think about what populism means, and thinking about the discontent of populations. So maybe Europe is going to be called upon to play that greater role. So the paradox is when we talk about what's in it for the rest of the world, these US elections, the stakes for the rest of the world, ultimately these US elections are asking a deep question to the other parts of the world. How do you do business in a world in which America is not omnipresent, it's not omnipotent anymore? And I think this means taking a lot of responsibilities in terms of thinking going down the line, and leadership going down the line. Dear Anne, I hope I wasn't too long, but those are the points that I wanted to raise with you.
Perfect. Maybe you were not too long. Thank you very much for this very interesting and passionate presentation about this topic. So we do have questions, as you can imagine. I will try to sort out a little bit the questions. So I'm sorry all if I don't mention exactly your question, but I will try to summarize so that we cover as many topics as possible in the time that we have left. So, Jeremy, as you can understand, there are many questions around, first of all, the fact that Trump has been threatening to contest the results if Biden wins, and how far do you think that can go? And there's maybe several people that also ask very, to me, related question as well. Maybe you can build on this as well. The idea that if Biden was to win, how do you think Trump would maintain a significant political presence in the country?
Yeah, no, I think those are very important questions. Constitutionally speaking, what you have to bear in mind is that everything is well written down. There is a new president coming in on January 20th at noon. That's, the US law that basically states this. And if there is no president by January 20th, which would really be an unlikely scenario at this point, means that basically you end up in a situation where the winner, or the president, the head of the House of Representatives, in this case Nancy Pelosi for now, would be the next US president. So this is crystal clear. It's true that you might face contested results, especially if Biden wins the popular vote, but the votes are extremely close in Pennsylvania and in Florida. And those two states are the remaining open states. You might see lawsuits and lawsuits and lawsuits. Those of you who are old enough to remember 2000, well, that's basically the reference point that many people mention, with one key difference is that in 2000, the incumbent president, Bill Clinton, sat this one out because he wasn't a candidate. In this case, the incumbent president would be one of the candidates. So that would be the difference. So the possibility of contested result, of inability to basically say who won the election early on, this is a true possibility going down the line. Whether Trump will remain a force, well, the answer is absolutely yes. Is it Donald Trump himself? Maybe. Donald Trump has always been attached. When you read about him, his biography, when you talk to his advisors, he's always been attached to his brand name, his last name. Trump losing might feel like the most embarrassing thing for any incumbent president. For him, it's okay when you think about it, because he's always been against the establishment, and he'll use this, I think, as an illustration of how the establishment tried to kill him politically, but he will pursue this fight, whether it's as a pundit, on a political, on a news channel, through his own media. I really believe that this is going to happen. If it's not Donald Trump, remember a figure like Sarah Palin, who was the vice president contender with John McCain in 2008. She resembles Donald Trump in many ways. So I think Donald Trump might actually have a lot of people who might inherit his legacy, and that might actually feel that his legacy is, the thing to bring forward. So I think whether it's Donald Trump or someone else, likely going to be a lasting force, continue to participate in the public debate, probably not through the usual political means, but probably at the margin where he's most comfortable.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. So I think we do have other questions. I'm trying to be fair in choosing, looking at the votes, but I think there is several people that were wondering also, do you think Trump's immigration policies would play a significant role on the election? So basically, who is voting and how does that impact the results?
Yeah. So immigration policy, I think that this has been part of a mobilizing force among conservatives, especially those who feel that immigration has transformed the country in a way that makes them uncomfortable. This is true in the United States, it's true in a wide range of countries. So immigration has been a significant part of his election campaign in 2016. In 2020, a little bit less so, because I think for an incumbent US president, it's always about the state of the economy that we spoke about rather than anything else. So yes, immigration, certainly conservatives believe that this is the guy who will save America from that standpoint. Okay, fair enough. Alternatively, do you see immigration potentially fundamentally changing demographics? We've been thinking that this is the case for quite some time. 2016 was kind of the contrarian example in all of this. What is important with immigration, what is important with this whole question is, what does it mean to be American today? Clearly, there's an identity vote in favor of Donald Trump. Clearly, there's a notion of saying we're a far more diverse country than what Donald Trump suggests in that vote for Joe Biden. And I think the struggle between the two Americas is another dimension of that polarization that we're seeing. Immigration will basically decide who votes for future presidents. Many specialists in demography suggest that the Democratic Party might have the upper hand, but don't underestimate the weight of those more rural populations, of those more conservative populations who see this as a threat. And again, I go back to the next president of the United States. What new narrative about the state of the country do you build in order to alleviate those tensions? That's going to be a crucial issue that you're going to have to deal with going down the line.
Thank you for this. There are a couple of questions also about how do you label those candidates. And in fact, one person who has the Wall Street Journal labels Biden as someone from the political left. Others say that he's more moderate liberal. And others from center right. Should he win the election, which label would you stick on him? His tenure in the office.
That's a cool question. That's a cool question. And I understand the confusion, especially because, when you're a challenger to an incumbent president, you have to accommodate a wide range of constituencies, especially these days, where Joe Biden got his endorsement from a part of the left wing of the party. So he's basically navigating left and right. And the main criticism of the Wall Street Journal against Joe Biden is to say, usually a presidential candidate leaves a huge imprint on the party he's the nominee. He's the nominee of. In this case, it's kind of the opposite. The Wall Street Journal says it's this Democratic Party that has gone left that is leaving a huge imprint on Joe Biden. That's the criticism from the Wall Street Journal. To get back to that question, is he from the left or the right? What is interesting is that, he's always been a moderate. He's always been a centrist, and this is important. The reason why we might be confused is that there has been academic research that is very interesting that has shown that basically if you think about the Democratic Party, but only online, only as you see it on the social media, only as you see it basically all of this, social media and online, well, the party is far more to the left than when you take out all of the social media and you're just stuck with basically policy stances and votes. So this is to say, online, you see a lot more of the left-wing branch of the party than when you're basically on the field in key Democratic states. So I think Biden is probably more moderate than what his stances suggest online. He's a president trying to basically get a large chunk of people to vote for him. What is challenging for him is that he needs to basically find a delegate balance. But again, going back and going down the line, if he is elected president, again, a big if, but if he is elected president tonight or tomorrow, what is interesting is that we're going to see a president whose biggest challenge is going to be to reconcile the country as a whole. And that's something that we're going to have to think about, because it's not going to be an easy task. And you're probably going to have to shift, if your name is Joe Biden and the Biden administration, a little bit more to the center than what we've seen so far.
Thank you. Many other questions, so I apologize in advance. We won't see everything, obviously, but there are a couple of questions about, again, the functioning in the US. And there's one from Monica that I see several people are interested in what impact will the conservative majority of the Supreme Court have on the US in the future?
Yeah, this is a very important question. And there are two ways to answer it. The most straightforward way is to say that progressives have lost influence on the Supreme Court on key issues related to campaign financing to the right to abortion and these types of things. So, and this is quite straightforward and it's quite true. And I'm certainly not putting this in question. They've lost that influence and it can be very worrisome that I think part of America that has always valued these rights quite significantly. But there's a whole a debate and controversy happening. So you might know, those of you who have studied US history, that there's always been a threat from political power on the Supreme Court to say, if you become too political, if you take decisions more according to political choices rather than the US Constitution, we will pack the Supreme Court. What does that mean? Right now, and by law, 9 Supreme Court justices, again, 6-3 in favor of conservative justices. And Roosevelt tried doing this after his New Deal was struck down by the Supreme Court. Let's try to add justices to basically restore the balance. Joe Biden has said that he feels extremely reserved with that option, and rightfully so, because that would mean in response to the politicization of the Supreme Court, that's not supposed to be a political body, then you're making it even more political, which is kind of a paradox. Instead, and when you listen to Joe Biden advisors on this issue, he's basically saying the Supreme Court is supposed to basically decide, you know, what is constitutional, what is not, what is basically legal, what is not. And if you really want the Supreme Court to act in a different way, then you have to legislate and legislate and legislate. In other words, Monica, and I think this is an important question, I think that yes, the impact will be significant, but I think that the next US president, if he disagrees or if she disagrees with Supreme Court rulings, is going to have to fundamentally invest and make those investments in changing the US law. There are perfectly a whole lot of challenges to basically do this. And I think that what is interesting and what is important going down the line is that if Democrats and if opponents of Donald Trump who do not like his choices for the Supreme Court want to act, it might be through the legislative branch that they might be able to influence the decisions of the Supreme Court going down the line. I hope I'm making sense, Monica.
Totally. Thanks, Jeremy. We have many other questions. Maybe just, there's a very uneasy one, and I know you talked about it already, but just because several people voted on what did COVID crisis change to all this? And you think there are some people that ask, do you think you would have won more easily without COVID? Others are saying, what did it change? So maybe you can just develop a little bit. What do you think the latest events have changed in these elections?
So I remember a day, it must have been a Wednesday in January, right after the State of the Union. Right after the State of the Union, a speech of Donald Trump in front of Congress. This was right about the time that there was a major fiasco in the Democratic primary in Iowa, where we basically didn't know who won. And right at a time where we had pretty positive economic news. And it is true, and obviously, at that time, we had started to talk about what was happening and about what the coronavirus might mean in terms of threat. But what was interesting is that you didn't have that on that radar screen. And right that Wednesday morning after the State of the Union speech, it occurred to me, you know, for all I know, Donald Trump has already won re-election. So I didn't know what was going to happen later on, but it's true that he was experiencing a really major, huge momentum. The problem with the coronavirus, and I think what this pandemic has changed since this was the question, is that I think the moment Trump was placed in a position where he needed to manage such a major crisis, this election became a referendum against or for Trump. And it has changed it in a way that, you know, we remember this saying, you know, a US presidential election is always about the economy. It's the economy stupid, right? It's always been about the economy. Well, it depends on how you answer that question. Again, right before the coronavirus and the pandemic, the economy was going very, very strong in the United States. And indeed, he might have had many, many assets to basically ride on that and get reelected. The only way I would qualify that is if there was a recession. There was a recession a month later because of the pandemic, but if there was a recession for some other reason, there were signs that economic activity was slowing down. There were signs that basically the rate at which job creation was happening in the United States was slowing down. So all of those indicators that usually hint to the possibility of a recession was actually happening, and that could have undermined his potential to be reelected. So it's very hard to do this counterfactual type of analysis because you never really know. It's true that he had huge momentum right before the pandemic, but on the other side, economic news was starting to get slightly more darker than what people wanted. What would he have been able to do to fight a quote unquote regular recession? That might have been the key element, but it's true that the coronavirus basically accelerated the recession and made it as spectacular as it is. Maybe not in terms of numbers, but most certainly in terms of impact on this election cycle.
Sorry. Right. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you. I think we are right on time. I'm sorry. I know there were many other questions. A lot of people asking you whether you have a crystal ball, right? Your prognostic and so on. So
unfortunately not.
Yeah, I know you'd be the one to hope you would know. So thank you all for following us today. Thank you very much, Jeremy, for these insightful comments. We really appreciate it. Thank you for making us understand it better.
With pleasure. And if I may just add one last thing, let's continue this conversation on LinkedIn and Twitter. I mean, I do not have a crystal ball, but by all means, let's continue. I'd be happy to.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you all for following. And I hope to see you in our next webinars. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.